Section 7 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks. Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771. By Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 7. January 1769, Part 2. 1769, January 18. Peter was very ill today, and Mr. Buchan not at all well. The rest of us, thank God, in good health, though not yet recovered from our fatigue. It blew fresh without, and made such a heaving swell in the bay that no one could go ashore, and even the ship was very uncomfortable, rolling so much that one could scarcely stand without holding. 1769, January 19. The swell still continued, and we were again hindered from going ashore, though the loss of 2 days out of the short time we had to stay here made the doctor and myself ready to venture any risk. The officer who was sent to attempt landing returned, bringing word that it was absolutely impossible, without great danger of staving the boat, if even that would do. Both yesterday and today a good deal of snow fell in squalls. 1769, January 20. Last night the weather began to moderate, and this morn was very fine, so much so that we landed without any difficulty in the bottom of the bay, and spent our time very much to our satisfaction in collecting shells and plants. Of the former we found some very scarce and very fine limpets, of several species. Of these we observed, as well as the shortness of our time would permit, that the limpet with a longish hole at the top of his shell is inhabited by an animal very different from those which have no such holes. Here were also some fine whelks, one particularly with a long tooth, and infinite variety of lapades, sertularias, onisci, etc., 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 much greater than I have seen anywhere. But the shortness of our time would not allow us to examine them, so we were obliged to content ourselves with taking specimens of as many of them as we could in so short a time scraped together. We returned on board to dinner, and afterwards went into the country about 2 miles to see an Indian town which some of our people had given us intelligence of. We arrived at it in about an hour walking through a path which I suppose was their common road, though it was sometimes up to our knees in mud. The town itself was situate upon a dry knoll among the trees, which were not at all cleared away. It consisted of not more than 12 or 14 huts or wigwams, of the most unartificial construction imaginable. Indeed, no thing bearing the name of a hut could possibly be built with less trouble. They consisted of a few poles set up and meeting together at the top in a conical figure. These were covered on the weather side with a few boughs and a little grass. On the lee side, about 1/8 part of the circle was left open, and against this opening was a fire made. Furniture, I may justly say, they had none. A little, very little, dried grass laid round the edges of the circle furnished both beds and chairs, and for dressing their shellfish, the only provision I saw them make use of, they had no one contrivance but broiling them upon the coals. For drinking, indeed, I saw in a corner of one of their huts a bladder of some beast full of water. In one side of this, near the top, was a hole, through which they drank by elevating a little the bottom, which made the water spring up into their mouths. In these few huts, and with this small share, or rather none at all, of what we call the necessaries and conveniences of life, lived about 50 men, women, and children, to all appearance contented with what they had, nor wishing for anything we could give them except beads. Of these they were very fond, preferring ornamental things to those which might be of real use, and giving more in exchange for a string of beads than they would for a knife or a hatchet. As this is to be the last time of our going ashore on this island, I take this opportunity to give an account of such things the shortness of my stay allowed me to observe. Notwithstanding almost all writers who have mentioned this island have imputed to it a want of wood, soon after we first saw it, even at the distance of some leagues, we plainly distinguished that the largest part of the country, particularly near the sea-coast, was covered with wood, which observation was verified in both the bays we put into, in either of which firing might have been got close by the beach in any quantity, and some trees, which to all appearance might be fit for repairing a vessel, or even, in case of necessity, to make masts. The hills are high, though not to be called mountains. The tops of these, however, are quite bare, and on them frequent patches of snow were to be seen, though the time of the year when we were there answered to the beginning of July in England. In the valleys between these the soil has much the appearance of fruitfulness, and is in some places of a considerable depth. At the bottom of almost every one of these runs a brook, the water of which in general has a reddish cast, like that which runs through turf bogs in England, but is very well tasted. Quadrupeds I saw none in the island, except the seals and sea lions, which we often saw swimming about in the bay, might be called such. But Dr. Solander and myself, when we were on top of the highest hill we were upon, observed the footsteps of a large beast imprinted on the surface of a bog, but could not with any probability guess of what kind it might be. Land birds there are very few. I saw none larger than an English blackbird, except hawks and a vulture, but waterfowl are much more plentiful. In the first bay we were in, I might have shot any quantity of ducks or geese, but would not spare the time from gathering plants. In the other we shot some, but probably the Indians in the neighbourhood had made them shy, as well as less plentiful. At least so we found them. Fish we saw few, nor could with our hooks take any fit to eat. Shellfish, however, are in the greatest abundance, limpets, mussels, clams, etc. None of them delicate, yet such as they were, we did not despise them. Insects there were very few, and not one species either hurtful or troublesome. All the time we have been here, we have seen neither gnat nor mosquito, a circumstance which few, if any, uncleared country, but this can boast of. Of plants, here are many species, and those truly the most extraordinary I can imagine. In stature and appearance, they agree a good deal with the European ones, only in general are less specious, white flowers being much more common among them than any other colours. But to speak of them botanically, probably no botanist has ever enjoyed more pleasure in the contemplation of his favourite pursuit than Dr. Solander and myself among these plants. We have not yet examined many of them, but what we have turned out in general so entirely different from any before described, that we were never tired with wondering at the infinite variety of creation, and admiring the infinite care with which Providence has multiplied his productions, suiting them no doubt to the various climates for which they are designed. Trees here are very few: birch, Betula antarctica, beech, Fagus antarcticus, winter's bark, Winterana aromatica. The first two for timber, the other for its excellent aromatic bark, so much valued by physicians, are all worth mentioning. And of plants we could not ascertain the virtues, not being able to conserve with the Indians, who may have experienced them. But the scurvy grass, Cardamine antiscorbutica, and the wild celery, Apium antarcticum, may easily be known to contain antiscorbutic virtues, capable of being of great service to ships who may in futurity touch here. Of these two, therefore, I shall give a short description. Scurvy grass is found plentifully in damp places near springs, in general everywhere near the beach, especially at the watering place in the Bay of Good Success. When young, and in its greatest perfection, it lays flat on the ground, having many bright green leaves, standing in pairs opposite each other, with an odd one at the end, which makes, in general, the fifth on a foot stalk. After this it shoots up in stalks, sometimes 2 feet high, at the top of which are small white blossoms, which are succeeded by long pods. The whole plant much resembles that is called lady's smock or cuckold flower in England, only that the flowers are much smaller. Wild celery resembles much the celery in our gardens, only that the leaves are of a deeper green. The flowers, like it, stand in small tufts at the tops of the branches and are white. It grows plentifully near the beach, generally in the first soil, which is above spring tides, and is not easily mistaken, as the taste resembles celery or parsley, or rather is between. Both these herbs we used plentifully while we stayed here, putting them in our soup, etc., and found the benefit from them which seamen in general find from vegetable diet, after having been long deprived of it. The inhabitants we saw here seemed to be one small tribe of Indians, consisting of not more than 50 of all ages and sexes. They are of a reddish colour, nearly resembling that of rusty iron mixed with oil. The men large built, but very clumsy. Their height from 5'8" to 5'10", nearly, and all very much of the same size. The women much less, seldom exceeding 5 feet. Their clothes are no more than a kind of cloak of guanaco or sealskin, thrown loose over their shoulders, and reaching down nearly to their knees. Under this they have nothing at all, nor anything to cover their feet, except a few of them had shoes of raw seal hide, drawn loosely around their instep, like a purse. In this dress there is no distinction between men and women, except that the latter have their cloak tied round their middle with a kind of belt or thong, and a small flap of leather hanging like Eve's fig leaf over those parts which nature teaches them to hide, which precept, though she has taught to them, she seems entirely to have omitted with the men, for they continually expose those parts to the view of strangers with a carelessness which thoroughly proves them to have no regard to that kind of decency. Their ornaments, of which they are extremely fond, consist of necklaces, or rather solitaires, of shells and bracelets which the women wear both on their wrists and legs, the men only on their wrists. But to compensate for the want of the other, they have a kind of wreath of brown worsted, which they wear over their foreheads, so that in reality they are more ornamented than the women. They paint their faces generally in horizontal lines just under their eyes, and sometimes make the whole region of their eye white. But these marks are so much varied that no two we saw were alike. Whether as marks of distinction or mere ornaments, I could not at all make out. They seem also to paint themselves with something like a mixture of grease and soot for particular occasions, as when we went to their town, there came two out to meet us who were daubed with black lines, all manner of ways, so as to form the most diabolical countenance imaginable, and these two seemed to exercise us, or at least made a loud and long harangue, which did not seem to be addressed either to us or any of their countrymen. Their language is guttural, especially in some particular words which they seem to express, much as an Englishman when he hawks to clear his throat. But they have many words that sound soft enough. During our stay among them I could learn but two of their words, nalaka, which signified beads, at least so they always said when they wanted them instead of ribbons or other trifles, which I offered them, and ouda, which signified water, or so they said when we took them ashore from the ship, and by signs asked where water was. Ouda was their answer, making the sign of drinking and pointing to our casks, as well as to the place where we put them ashore and found plenty of water. Of civil government I saw no signs. No one seemed to be more respected than another, nor did I ever see the least appearance of quarrelling or words between any two of them. Religion also they seemed to be without, unless those people who made strange noises that I have mentioned before were priests or exorcists, which opinion is merely conjectural. Their food, at least what we saw them make use of, was either seals or shellfish. How they took the former we never saw, but the latter were collected by the women, whose business it seemed to be to attend at low water, with a basket in one hand, a stick with a point and barb on the other, and a satchel on their backs, which they filled with shellfish, loosening the limpets with a stick and putting them into the basket, which when full was emptied into the satchel. Their arms consisted of bows and arrows, the former neatly enough made, the latter neater than I have ever seen, polished to the highest degree, and headed either with glass or flint very neatly. But this was the only thing they had, and the only thing they seemed to take any pains about. Their houses, which I have described before, are the most miserable ones imaginable, and furniture they have none. That these people have before had intercourse with Europeans was very plain, from many instances. First, from the European commodities of which we saw sailcloth, brown woolen cloth, beads, nails, glass, etc., and of them especially the last, which they used for pointing their arrows, a considerable quantity. From the confidence they immediately put in us at our first meeting, though well acquainted with our superiority, and from the knowledge they had of the use of our guns, which they very soon showed, making signs to me to shoot a seal who was following us in the boat which carried them ashore from the ship. They probably travel and stay but a short time at a place, so at least it should seem, from the badness of their houses, which seemed entirely built to stand but for a short time, from their having no kind of household furniture but what has a handle adapted to it, either to be carried in the hand or on the back, from the thinness of their clothing, which seems little calculated even to bear the summers of this country, much less the winters, from their food of shellfish, which must soon be exhausted at any one place, and from the deserted huts we saw in the first bay we came to, where people had plainly been but a short time before, probably this spring. Boats they had none with them, but as they were not seasick or particularly affected when they came on board our ship, possibly they might be left at some bay or inlet, which passes partly, but not all the way, through this island from the Straits of Magellan, from which place I should be much inclined to believe these people have come, as so few ships before us have anchored on any part of Tierra del Fuego. Their dogs, which I forgot to mention, seem also to indicate a commerce had some time or other with Europeans, they being all of the kind that bark, contrary to what has been observed of, I believe, all dogs native to America. The weather here has been very uncertain, though in general extremely bad. Every day since the first more or less snow has fallen, and yet the glass has never been below 38. Unseasonable as this weather seems to be in the middle of summer, I am inclined to think it is generally so here, for none of the plants appear at all affected by it, and the insects, who hide themselves during the time a snow blast lasts, are the instant it is fair again as lively and nimble as the finest weather could make them. 1769, January 21. Sailed this morn. The wind foul, but our keeping boxes being full of new plants, we little regarded any wind, provided it was but moderate enough to let the draftsmen work, who, to do them justice, are now so used to the sea that it must blow a gale of wind before they leave off. 1769, January 22. Weather pleasant, but a little cold wind came to the northward, and we get a little westing. 1769, January 23. At daybreak this morn there was land almost around us, which we judged to be Terra del Fuego, not far from the straits, and attributed the little way we had made to the strength of the current, setting us to the eastward. Our old friend the Sugarloaf was now in sight, who seemed to have followed us, for he was certainly much nearer to us now than he was when we saw him last on the other side of these straits. 1769, January 24. Many islands about us today. Weather very moderate. One of the islands was surrounded by small pointed rocks, standing out of the water like the needles. Ever since we left the straits, the albatrosses that have flown about the ship have either been or appeared much larger than those seen before we entered them. But the weather has never been moderate enough to give us an opportunity of getting out a boat to shoot any of them. 1769, January 25. Wind today northwest. Stood in with some islands, which were large. We could not tell for certain whether we saw any part of the main. The little island mentioned yesterday was in view, and beyond that the land made in a bluff head, within which another appeared, though but faintly, which was farther to the southward. Possibly that might be Cape Horn, but a fog which overcast it almost immediately after we saw it hindered our making any material observations upon it. So all we can say is that it was the southernmost land that we saw, and does not ill answer to the description of Cape Horn given by the French, who placed it upon an island, and say that it is composed of two bluff headlands. V. Naviga au Terra Australis, Tome 1, page 356. 1769, January 26. Weather vastly moderate today. Wind foul, so we were sorry that we had ran away from the land last night. 1769, January 27. Wind came to the northward, and we got some little westing. Possibly today we were to the westward of the Cape. At least a great swell from the northwest makes it certain that we are to the southward of it. Many large albatrosses, D. exulans, were about the ship, whose backs were very white. At noon a shag, Pelecanus antarcticus, came on board the ship and was taken. Soon after dinner saw an island to the northward, possibly Diego Ramirez. 1769, January 28. Pleasant breezes, but a heavy swell from north-northwest continued, and made it very likely we were past the Cape, though we had made but little westing. 1769, January 29. Wind still foul and swell continued. Today at noon lat 59.00. 1769, January 30. At noon today lat 60.04. Near calm. Almost all navigators have met with easterly winds in this latitude, so we were in hopes to do the same. Towards even, wind got to the southward. 1769, January 31. Wind southeast. Stood to the westward with very fine weather. End of section 7, part 2, January 1769.